Hi, I'm attorney Renee Osipov with Chelle Law, and we assist parents, guardians, and students who are having issues surrounding IEPs and special education, specifically in the public school or charter school setting. In this video, I'm discussing how to write an IEP and what is that process. So to back it up a little bit, an IEP is an individualized education plan. It's mandated and all the requirements are actually through federal law. So they apply to all 50 states. And there are requirements and timelines all outlined in the Individuals with Disability Act specifically. But the IEP itself and how it gets written, I'll kind of walk you through that process, and also when writing an IEP, what's included in it. So it starts off the IEP process. It's normally the parent who is requesting the child to be evaluated, but not always. It can also come from the school. If they're seeing that a child is really struggling, they may request or refer evaluation for an IEP. At the evaluation process, and the IEP team will meet to see if an evaluation needs to happen or if there's already enough data collected on the student. So this could be healthcare providers, therapists, or just observations and data from the general education teacher. So this could be behavior in the classroom, it could be grades, things like that. So the team would all come together, including the parent. This is important because I think parents sometimes feel like they're left out, and they're actually a valued member of the IEP team. So the evaluation team meets together to see if the child meets the requirements for an IEP. Once that happens, then this is the process of writing the IEP. So I'm going to kind of walk through the portions of it. IEPs are pretty large documents. They're, I would say, anywhere from 12 pages, like up to 20. I've seen 20 pages. So they're pretty extensive. So I'm going to walk through the categories and what would be included in that. So first, let's start off with current skill level. So this is going to be the data that the team probably looked at for the evaluation. So current skill level may be grades, but it's going to go further than that. So if a child's struggling in reading or in math, for example, this could be grades, but it could go further than that. So if we're at the elementary level, the observations of the general education teacher may say something like, has difficulty adding a 2-digit plus a 2-digit number, or the child has difficulty subtracting numbers without using tools or a number line, something like that. So it's going to give you a clear picture where the student is starting off. This also can include behavior. So it could say something like the child becomes agitated during reading when they have difficulty decoding a word, something like that. And it's probably going to be a couple of paragraphs, and it will go through each subject level as well. So normally it's reading, math, writing, language arts, science. Sometimes social studies is included, but not always, and sometimes specials as well. But those core subjects, those will always be included, especially if the child needs services in those areas. Then annual goals are going to be written. So in this section of the IEP, the team is going to assess and they're going to write very specific goals for the year. So what this may look like, we were talking about adding 2-digit plus 2-digit numbers. So we could say something like the child can use strategies without prompt to add 2-digit plus 2-digit numbers. So that's the goal for them. It's very clear. We know if the child's going to meet the goal or not going to meet the goal at the end of the year. We can look at the data and decide that. Like I said, they're pretty specific. It's rare that they're very vague. So a poorly written goal would be something like the child will receive an A in reading. That's not really going to tell us much. It's going to be very detailed and normally skill specific. So the child will decode words that have long vowels or short vowels, something like that. Or they will use certain strategies or skills without prompt in order to decode words. That's probably a better example. And the annual goals will then be brought up they look at them regularly, but there's an annual IEP meeting every year that the team assembles, including the parents, and they will look at those annual goals and say, has the child met those? If they haven't, what needs to be changed so that they can meet those goals? So they're sort of an indicator of how the child is progressing. And then that kind of leads us into the next part is progress monitoring, or sometimes it's called progress tracking. So they're used interchangeably. This is how are we going to track that student throughout the year to see if their goal is being met. So this portion of it would look like how often are they being assessed. So if we're using spelling as a goal, we would say that the child would receive weekly spelling assessments. And then it may go into more detail. But we know the frequency that they're being tracked, like I just said, it's weekly. And what's being tracked, spelling and their skills within the spelling goal. So sometimes tracking doesn't happen weekly or progress monitoring. It can happen monthly, it can happen quarterly. It kind of really just depends on what the need of the student is and what the team comes together and decides. But there will be some type of tracking throughout the year, and it will be in grave detail how they would be tracking to see if the student's meeting the goals. Because throughout the year, if they're tracking the student and no progress is being made, then maybe the IEP team needs to reassemble or have another meeting and discuss if either those goals are not feasible, or if some other accommodation or modification needs to happen in order to get the child to that goal. Then next we can go into special education services. So this is what's specifically different with an IEP than a 504 plan. They have a lot of overlaps. They give accommodations to students with disabilities, but specifically an IEP is going to give special education services. So this is when the student would actually leave the classroom and go for specialized instruction. So perhaps they're not at the grade level for reading, math, or science, and no accommodation within the classroom is going to get them to that level. So therefore, they need to be pulled out and have specialized education instruction. And maybe the goal is not for them to be at grade level. Maybe it's to have a specific skill that they need to be working on. And so all of that, the specialized education is really important to have clear, because this is when the student's going to leave the general education classroom. They're going to go to the special education room and they're going to receive, it's normally small group instruction. Sometimes it's one-on-one. It kind of just depends on the child's needs. Then we're going to talk about the next section, which would be the duration of services. So this is really important, and it's because it needs to be clear so that the parent knows if the IEP is being implemented properly. These are protections for the student. So duration of services, what does this mean? So sometimes if the child is receiving therapy within the school, so potentially an OT or a PT would be coming in for services, there would be, it's normally specific minutes, either throughout the week or throughout the day. Normally services are in minutes, and the reason why it's in minutes is because sometimes maybe a therapist can't come on a Monday for some reason, and so they have to come on the next day, like on that Tuesday, or there's a holiday, and so that way it's easier to implement those services. Because if it's written that the child will receive OT therapy for 30 minutes on Monday and there's a holiday, well, then the school is in breach of the IEP. So normally it's just minutes per week. So it gives the school a little bit of flexibility if needed. Also, If the child is pulled out for special education services, which we just talked about, that would be included in minutes as well. It's really important that that's included because the law favors the child being in the general education classroom as much as possible. It's called least restrictive environment. And so they don't want the child to be pulled out of the classroom any longer than necessary. So that's why the minutes are going to be in there. So it could say pulled out for special education services, specifically reading, math, or writing, and then it will have the minutes for each one of those. And that's so that everybody can be on the same page and it's just easy to track. And then the next sort of section would be participation in the general education classroom. So as I stated before, the law favors that the child would be in the general education classroom. It's called inclusion. That could be a term that you may hear the school use, but the law favors that students are around their peers as much as possible and not pulled out for services unless it's actually needed. So that would be written in minutes as well. Now, if they're participating in the general education classroom, they still can receive services. What does this look like? Perhaps they are given an aide, so a staff member who's specially trained will be with the student in the general education classroom to help them, give them prompts. Maybe they have fine motor skills issues and the aide could help with that. Behavioral plans. There's really sort of endless reasons why a child would need an aide. Also, perhaps they're given special tools or services within the classroom. The most common example I see is if a child has sensory processing disorder or autism spectrum disorder, they may be given some type of sensory tools within the classroom to help them remain focused. So that's common too. And then any type of testing adaptations. So this is testing within the school, so maybe reading tests, spelling tests, things like that, but also statewide testing. That's important and it needs to be written in the IEP. So when it comes time for that child to be tested at the state level, perhaps they have an aide read the test to them, or they're given more time. They're allowed to take the testing outside of the classroom. All of that will be written in, and it's normally a specific section of the IEP itself. And then transitional goals and services. So as the child is reaching their goals, the overall plan is that the child will be at grade level, common to their peers, and if those goals are being met, what is the transition away from the IEP, special education, or other types of services? So just to kind of reiterate and to summarize, I broke the IEP down into 8 parts, but sometimes these things overlap and there's no specific form that a school has to fill out, but these are all the categories that are required by federal law to be included. So not every IEP is going to look identical, but you can find these 8 parts in every IEP. The order just may be different, or the wording may be a little bit different. The other thing too, before I summarize what those 8 categories are, is it's important to note that parents typically don't write an IEP. They can definitely give written input, so what their concerns are, what accommodations they would like. I meet with clients and do this all the time. So the parent sort of writes a letter and they get very specific about what they want included in the IEP because they are a member of the team. But however, the actual IEP itself is typically drafted by the special education coordinator or some type of administration within the school. And then the parents look over the IEP and sign if they agree to the terms within. So before I end the video, I'm just going to go through the 8 sections one more time. So the current level of the student, annual goals, progress tracking or progress monitoring, 4, special education services, 5, the duration of the services, 6, participation in the mainstream or general education classroom, 7, testing adaptations, and 8, transitional goals and services. If you would like help drafting an IEP letter of what you would like for your child to receive, or you need help looking at the IEP, understanding it, or you want to amend a current IEP for your student, please reach out to us. We are happy to help. We're very familiar with all of the processes, and we're happy to draft something up for you to give to your child's school. And all of our contact information, and I have other videos, it's linked in the description below this video. Thanks.